These are the jokes, that's the things that they are still programming. This guy's more like actually
Bueno, yo voy a dar una no como algo que se queda solamente en San Francisco y en Estados Unidos, tema del aborto con mucha fuerza aquí en Estados Unidos, pero se expande a todo el mundo. También por favor de la noche, pues este crimen no contrario más bien la esperanza se extienda. Entonces quiero reconocer esta lucha que se hace aquí en San Francisco, porque si aquí en San Francisco, que es la falta de violencia, ¿no? Como le dicen, y hasta nos lo hacen saber, la importancia de mantenernos firmes en esta lucha recae no solamente como personas, sino como seres humanos. Entonces, pues nada, nos vemos en la marcha por la vida en California en Sacramento.
I don't think West Virginia's ready for what's about to happen next.
This segment's going to be a little bit more heavy. We're discussing the special cases, so rape and incest. Unfortunately, this has to be a part of the abortion conversation on whether or not provisions should be given for these things. I do want to say before we begin, I have nothing but compassion and respect for victims of any of this, and so if it seems like at any time we're a little bit callous, cold, or calculating, we're dealing with numbers here. It is a very trying and horrible thing that can happen to a person, but at the end of the day, when it comes to decisions like this being made, emotions should not be the deciding factor, information should be. And I know that seems like a very callous take, but just know before we begin, I have nothing but compassion, and of course, obviously, there will be sources in the description below if you need them. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about some of the statistics around rape, starting and go from there. And we're going to address all sorts of aspects of this argument and laws surrounding this, why some of this might happen, all this stuff. But starting with statistics, most notably, 1 in 5 women in the United States experience complete or attempted rape during their lifetime, and nearly a quarter, 24.8% of men in the United States experience some form of contact sexual violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3 female victims of completed or attempted rape experienced it for the first time between the ages of 11 and 17, and then 1 in 4 male victims of completed or attempted rape experienced it between the ages of 11 and 17 for the first time. It's estimated that 734,630 people were raped, including threatened or attempted or completed rape in the U.S. in 2018. Like I said, cold callous, apologies, but I do have an issue with the statistic because initially it says raped, but then it says threatened or attempted, which means that the rape was not completed. Now, of course, being threatened with rape or somebody attempting to rape you is horrible, but there is a difference between somebody doing that and actually doing the act, which is completing the act or completed rape. And so with that statistic, I find it a little bit misleading in the sense as it doesn't just focus on one of those areas, and while all are important in a conversation really revolving around specifically this, it's just frustrating that I struggled to find any sources that did not include attempted or threatened or some other category besides just actual rape. 40% of rape and sexual assaults were reported to police in 2017, but only about 25% were reported in 2018. One of the biggest issues with tracking rape is underreporting. A lot of rape cases go unreported, unfortunately. And reporting doesn't mean hopping on social media and saying it happened. Reporting doesn't mean saying it happened in a poll. Reporting means going to the police and saying that it happened, filing an actual police report. So the prevalence of false reporting, and this is what's important, for sexual assault crimes is low, between 2 and 10%. We will get more into this in a little bit, but like I said, reporting is talking about going to the police, not telling a survey, not hopping on social media. Not that I'm saying that people in those are lying. I'm just saying that there is a distinction and a difference in what means what. Almost 1 in 4 undergrad women experience sexual assault or misconduct at 33 of the nation's major universities. Sorry. Again, I have an issue with this statistic because, great, sexual assault, 1 in 4 women who are undergraduate experience sexual assault. That is useful information, especially in this conversation. And then they go on to say, or misconduct. So which is it? Were they sexually assaulted, or did somebody just say something rude? Because that's what misconduct means. Misconduct means saying something you shouldn't be saying to another person. It makes these statistics hard to use because you don't know exactly how many of that 1 in 4 are the misconduct and how many of them are the sexual assault. It's frustrating and makes it hard to use in these conversations, honestly and transparently. About half, 51.1% of female victims of rape reported being raped by an intimate partner, and 40.8% reported being raped by an acquaintance. Over half, 52.4% of male victims report being raped by an acquaintance, and 15.1% report by a stranger. Both of these statistics are lacking a segment of information. How many men are raped by their intimate partner, and how many women are raped by strangers? Like, don't get me wrong, this source is great for intimate information. This source is amazing for helping me provide a baseline for you guys, but this is the sort of stuff I'm talking about when we're having these conversations that makes it very difficult to have these conversations honestly and properly, is using language to make rape statistics very difficult to follow and apply in a manner that is truly demonstrative of the actual issue. And so it's annoying when I'm trying to have this conversation that does consider these things, when it's difficult to get that information straight up and honestly. I do have some demographic statistics from RAIN. 80,600 inmates were sexually assaulted or raped, and this is an average of each year. 60,000 children were victims of sustained or indicated sexual abuse. 433,648 just general public Americans 12 and older were sexually assaulted or raped. And then 18,900 military personnel experienced unwanted sexual contact. Just the scope of the problem in all different facets of life. What's really disgusting is that 60,000 number. But yeah, I could not find the year that this was from. I have years for everything else, but this one I cannot find in my notes. I'm sure I saw it. If you want to go check the show notes on Patreon and find it for yourself, knock yourself out. So everyone's affected by sexual violence. Every 68 seconds, another American is sexually assaulted, and that just means improper touching. That does not mean rape. Rape is penetration. Sexual assault is something different, I will say. So when we are talking about this, there is a distinction between sexual assault and rape, although I have a lesser issue between combining the two. But when we are talking about pregnancy by rape and then how it applies to abortion, I really struggled to find proper statistics and stuff that only talked about rape. 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. 14.8% completed and then 2.8% attempted. See, that's how you do that statistic. About 3% of American men, or 1 in 33, have experienced an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. There's a lot of, this statistics obviously dispersed from the one we talked about earlier, which is always annoying that no matter where you look, statistics are different. It just depends on the difference of how they counted things. 9 out of every 10 victims of rape are female. It makes sense on just a running level. That's generally the consensus in the culture. But yeah, and here are, I'll just up here. Reading's already getting hard. A breakdown of locations where sexual assault happens. I feel like this is important. A majority of them are at or near the victim's house, and that's because a majority of these involve somebody that the victim knows, which is really unfortunate and horrible. 48% of rapes happen while the individual is asleep. Well, not rape, sexual assault. There's a difference. But 48% of sexual assault happens while the victim is asleep. Only 8% happen on school property, which is good. School should be a place that children feel safe for the most part. And I say for the most part because life's scary and dangerous and kids are sometimes going to be afraid. Happens. That's part of life. But children should feel safe at school, so that's good. I don't know. Here we go. Here's what I wanted to talk about. So the challenge of tracking down truthful rape statistics. Now this does come from an article addressing. This comes from an article addressing rape by country. It says 2025, but all the stats are labeled 2023 or 4, so it's the internet. I've noticed that a lot of stuff and their tagline will say 2025, but in reality, when you actually go look at the information, it is from a past year. So if you're going and looking for it, just know that the tagline isn't the same as the reality. Not that this information's bad or anything, I'm just saying. So, as of 2023, 2024, the United States overall rape count, according to World Population Review, is 141,486, and then our per capita, percentage, is 41.8%, and that puts us at the 10th highest country when it comes to rape. Obviously not good, because there's a lot of countries out there. However, 1, most countries go underreported, and we're going to talk about it in a second. 2, secondly, the United States is one of the largest countries in the world, both spatially and population-wise. We have one of the most, we do have the most diverse demographic. And so this is very, understandable and believable. We're not talking about a tiny country that has this number, which is why it's ranked 10 and has an under 50% when it comes to the statistic, even though we have a number that high. So the challenge of tracking down truthful rape statistics. Accurate statistics regarding rape are notoriously difficult to obtain. The biggest complication is that most victims of sexual violence choose not to report it. There are many possible reasons for this decision: embarrassment, victim shaming, fear of reprisal from the rapist, even fear of how the victim's own family will react. The rest of that quote's up. You're welcome to pause and read it, but I'm going to talk. So that is one issue that drives the disparity of getting proper and accurate rape statistics. Another thing is certain countries, specifically third world countries, do not have the proper means to count, report, track this. There is a incentive for these third world countries to lie about that. And we did see with the Me Too movement, trust in rape statistics dropped because honesty in reporting rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, all that, honesty in that just went out the window. And you can argue with me and you can be mad at me for that in the comments saying that, but that is what we statistically saw. That is That is what happened. Like that's what happened. That's what the stats show. That's what the data shows. That's what the information shows is what happened with that movement, unfortunately, because it did have some very good ideas to it and aspects to it. But unfortunately, that's the direction it went in. Further, it's just enforcement wise in some of these other countries is rough, and it's just not properly enforced, or like I said, they have these incentives not to record it, and they also just don't sometimes. It just happens that they don't record it and report it. And then lastly, of course, the woman or the man, the victim, feeling shame, guilt. That's actually very common with male victims. We find male victims of rape have way more shame and guilt over it than female victims. They are way less likely to report, way more likely to blame themselves, and way more likely to be judged for it than a female victim. And that's not, of course, downplaying the effects that this has on the female victim. It's just we are talking about both males and females right now, and just overall rape statistics. So we are going to talk about the fact that men are more likely to suffer psychologically when it comes to feeling shame, guilt, being bullied, put down for it. A lot of men, especially younger men who are raped, are told, or sexually assaulted, or sexually harassed, are congratulated. That's very common. And so the male statistic is extremely underreported. Sorry. We also find that men, when it comes to these things, are less... The only word I can think of is sensitive, but that's not the word I want to use. Are less inclined to come to the conclusion that they have been treated in that manner, if that makes sense. Like, sometimes it's cut and dry, like, clearly you said no, like, this is what happened. But, like, sexual assault, sexual harassment, stuff like that, guys don't generally think those things are those things, if that makes sense. An example, and this is a very crude example, but getting catcalled on the street counts as sexual harassment. No guy, no straight masculine dude, no dude is going to be like, oh, that's sexual harassment. If anything, he might be complimented. However, especially on the internet, there's a ton of girls who get upset about it. That's what I mean by this. Guys aren't going to report this as much, and this is less true for rape. That, like I said, sometimes there's nothing else that could be. Like, it is most certainly that. But even sexual assault, which is touching inappropriately, sometimes goes right over guys' heads. I'm not, like, especially into sports culture, like, there are things in sports that would be considered literally anywhere else sexual assault. The slap on the ass culture in sports, sorry, but that slap on the ass culture in sports, do that with people of other groups and demographics in other settings where those groups will actually still continue to do that in those other settings. So the sports culture, the sports group, even just the masculine manly world will continue to do that. And you'll even have women who treat men that way, just publicly. They might not be their partner. They might not be anything like that. That is sexual harassment. That is sexual assault. Most guys don't clock it as that. Most guys don't think of it as that. Whereas most women in that situation do. It's just a fact. That's how that goes. That's how it rolls. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. But that's part of what creates this disparity between the male and female statistic is men don't think of the things that are technically those things as what they are. So men don't think sexual assault, sexual harassment, stuff like that is actually that. Does that make sense? I feel like I did a good job explaining that. So that adds to the disparity of these statistics. And I already mentioned that the United States is 10th, so we're moving on. Next up, teen dating violence. I feel like this is an important thing to just sort of quickly highlight, since one argument for abortion, specifically when it comes to the rape and incest thing, is that young girls will lose their life if they have the child. Okay. And by that I mean more in the metaphorical sense, like they won't be able to go live their life. So, about 1 in 12 teens experience physical dating violence, so DV, and about 1 in 10 experience sexual dating violence, so SA, rape, sexual harassment, I guess. Does that count? No, because that's more verbal. So yeah. There you go. That's how prevalent it is in teen relationships. 1 in 10, according to this source. I gotta say that. Sorry. I know. It sounds very, dismissive, but I have to say, according to this source, allegedly, That's going to come up way more in a few minutes, the allegedly. Not for this, but the next segment is going to be a lot of allegedlys. Supporting healthy relationships can reduce teen dating violence and prevent its harmful, long-lasting effects on individuals, their families, and their communities. And again, here's the full quote, but I'm going to be talking. So, with this, and this is not making excuses for anyone because it's inexcusable, part of what comes up with this is lack of experience. As in, like, obviously we all know certain things are right and wrong. However, teens are more likely to not know that certain things are specifically right or wrong, or have the emotional and physical maturity and control to not do certain things. And that is by no way making excuses for the behavior. It is shining light onto why this behavior might occur prevalently. Especially since teen relationships, you're not living in the same house. You're not, necessarily always, it's harder to just go off on your own. Like, so why is it in relationships that are generally more controlled that we see at least 1 in 10 fall into this, and then 1 in 12 for the physical violence? And I would say it's a lack of emotional intelligence, and then self-control, regulation of one's own emotions, emotional regulation. There we go. That was the word. That was the saying. But yeah. It's an unfortunate statistic, and I just wanted to sort of shine light on that. So obviously prevention is having those conversations with your teen. Hey, parents, make sure the person your kid's dating is not a piece of shit. I didn't date in high school. I didn't find anybody who was at my high school interesting or attractive enough to date. So there was that. So I never experienced teen dating, but all of my friends did. And so I can say, just from the knowledge of that, keep an eye on your kids. Your kids are getting up to some freaky deaky shit, and you don't know it. And, maybe do a double check on the people they're dating. Obviously, if you put your foot down, especially with young girls, they will be like, no, I'm going to go out with this person because you said no. That happens. It happens. So obviously you can't treat it in that manner. However, don't just throw caution to the wind, because it can really clearly bite you in the ass. Next up, I want to talk about what exactly is rape, since we've been talking about statistics about it. What is it legally? How does the law define rape? And so this is an excerpt, and it states that the crime of rape, often referred to as sexual assault, which there is a difference. Sexual assault is physical touching. Rape does have a specific element to it that has to occur for it to be that. But sexual assault is just inappropriate physical touching. And there is a debate around this, but we'll get into that in a second. So the crime of rape, often referred to as sexual assault, occurs when someone engages in non-consensual sexual conduct against another person. Rape may involve the use of threatened. Oh, that says or. I am so sorry. I might be a dyslexic bitch. That is possible. Allegedly. Rape may involve the use or threatened use of physical force or other forms of coercion or duress. We're going to pretend that didn't happen. The legal definition of rape. So the Federal Department of Justice, or the DOJ, provides an updated definition of rape in 2012 that still helps guide federal and state laws. It states that rape includes the penetration. So that's a big one. So there's a couple of words I want you to remember. First is penetration. So penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by sex organ or another person without the consent of the victim. So penetration and consent. Those are the two words you really need to remember. The legal definition obviously has evolved and changed over time. And so most states reinstated a broader term, especially when it comes to statutory rape, which we'll get into in a minute, briefly, and sexual assault, which again, sexual assault is touching. Rape is a little bit more clinical in its definition. And so how does the law define consent just because it's something we're talking about. Consent just basically means an agreement, and it's a very legal term, actually. There's all sorts of like layers to consent. Like you have to be sober, you have to be of a certain mentation. Technically, when it comes to legal documents and stuff, you have to be of legal consenting age, which is 18. So there is all sorts of stuff when it comes to consent that plays. But basically, when we're talking about sex, that level of legality kind of ebbs back a little bit, obviously. And so basically, it just means an agreement. So the person says yes, and it can be explicit or implied. Now, implied consent can be a little bit tricky, and some people have tried to use this as a defense multiple times. Implied consent simply just means that I'm trying to think about how to because even here it says implied consent includes nonverbal actions that encourage sexual activity, though it requires careful interpretation. Like, it's very... Because you can imply consent by making out heavy with somebody and touching them inappropriately, but they don't actually want certain elements of sex, and you do that anyways. At that point, that becomes rape because they didn't consent to that specific... You know what I mean? So there is a certain level of implied consent. Implied consent really works better in preformed relationships. So your hookup can't really give you implied consent because there isn't a history there, but your girlfriend of 2 years probably can. Does that make more sense? There's got to be a level of understanding, a level of trust, a level of just... You just can't run with it. Implied consent's not just a run with sort of thing. Punishment and other consequences of rape. Obviously, there's been a very interesting push from the right over the past couple of years of having rapists be chemically castrated along with other types of sex... Words. There has been an interesting push from the right over the past couple of years of having rapists chemically castrated along with other types of sex offenders. So, just note that. But here's the actual punishments for rape. All right, so we're going to talk about the U.S. Code real quick. So, any person subject to this chapter who commits a sexual act upon another person by using unlawful force against that person, so coercion, using force causing or likely to cause death or grievous bodily harm, coercion, threatening, coercion, rendering the person unconscious. So date rape drugging people, or I guess they could also they do by that language they also mean bonking them upside the head. But like if you're doing that, I'm guessing you're a serial killer. Just saying. Administering to that person by force or threat of force without knowledge of consent of person that drug, intoxicant, or other similar substance. Here's sexual assault. So the U.S. Code for sexual assault, here we go, commits a sexual act upon another person without the consent of the other person. I'm going to just quickly show the rest of these U.S. codes, actually, and then I'm going to talk about this. Don't do this. If you do this, you're weird. Don't do this. And these are definitions. Cool. So, rape. The reason the definition of rape gets tricky is I by no means am defending the event that I'm about to tell you about. I actually think it's completely and utterly reprehensible and disgusting. But for a while, feminists were trying to convince people that men can't be raped. By a woman, that is. So essentially there was a push briefly by certain groups, not all feminists, obviously, and not every wave, but fourth wave feminists, a certain section of the fourth wave feminist movement was trying to convince people that men cannot be raped by women. Because the standard was penetration. And so the thought was, a woman doesn't have anything to penetrate a man with, so therefore, she can't, rape somebody. What changes with that is the idea that the forced penetration can basically be interpreted one of two ways. One way is just straight up forced penetration means you forcefully penetrate another person. Secondly, forced penetration can also mean you forcefully penetrate a person or someone forces you to penetrate them. Therefore, women can be rapists, and that's where the definition and the line of sexual assault versus rape diverges. Sexual assault is inappropriate sexual touching. Rape is forced penetration, whether you are forcibly penetrating another person or another person is forcing an individual to penetrate them. That's basically what this all boils down to. Because in order for rape to be applicable to our conversation today, we really need to think of it that way, but also that is kind of how the wider society thinks about it, because sexual assault is inappropriate sexual touching, and that's penetration of, like they said, mouth, anus, or vagina. So oral, anal, vaginal sex, all three of those, if you are forcibly penetrating or forcing someone to penetrate you in that way, that is rape. Sexual assault is touching inappropriately. Does that make sense? Cool. So I want to talk about some things that are actually very important to this conversation, and that is certain acts and laws that have been passed to help prevent and help improve the life of sexual assault victims and rape victims. So first and foremost, we have the Debbie Smith Act. So this basically aims to end the rape kit backlog, so help after the fact, adds more funding to all sectors of this, improves the National Forensics DNA database, requires states to have a plan to properly prosecute and log and work through evidence from rape cases. And so this is the survivor who this act, Debbie Smith Act, was based off of. And she has here's a quote from her, but I'm going to read you her story real quick. So in 1989, Debbie Smith was sexually assaulted by a stranger who broke into her home. Although she underwent a sexual assault forensics exam, the DNA evidence went unanalyzed for over 5 years. That is disgusting. In 1994, the forensic evidence was finally entered into CODIS and the FBI's national database and yielded a hit identifying the perpetrator. At the time, the perpetrator was already incarcerated, serving 161 years for robbing and abducting 2 women. He was brought to trial and eventually convicted of the rape of Debbie Smith. 1. I didn't look too hard into this because this video needs to move along. However, I would really love to know if her rape came before or after the robbery and abduction. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess it probably happened before, which is partly why this act was so important. Is because if they had just arrested him on raping her, he never would have been able to harm 2 other women. Which is horrible to say because obviously we don't, it would have been preferable that she never went through that, but you can't always have it that way. And so when bad things happen, the best thing we can do as a society is find ways to have a good outcome for them from those bad things, and that would have been a good outcome. Not allowing him to run free and then do it again. Although it doesn't say that he raped those 2, he just abducted them. So, building off of the Debbie Smith Act was the SAFER Act, and basically it increases funding and training and equipment for DNA testing, improves the standards for DNA collection and testing for the FBI, and just overall increases the national standard for DNA testing and logging and training and how to do all this and equipment. And it's just building off of what the Debbie Smith Act stated and just overall improving how it interacts in the culture. Next up, we have the Clery Act. So, name of the law fully is the Jane Cleary Disclosure of Campus Policy or Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Clery Act. There's a lot that goes into this. I'm not going to cover every detail, just like there's more that goes into the Debbie Smith Act, but just know that this act is actually kind of impressive, and I feel like a majority of schools might fall short, actually, but we'll see. We'll see what you think. So essentially, the Clear Act requires greater transparency from schools, along with quick warnings from colleges and universities about crimes that are committed on campus. including crimes of sexual violence. When it was passed in 1980, most recently amended Campus Save Act. It was passed in 1990, and it was amended by the Campus Save Act in 2013, which we're going to talk about in a second. So it's for Janine Cleary, and I'll tell you her story in a second. But it covers things like stalking, intimidation, dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, hate crimes. And an ASR must be published by colleges and disclose 3 years worth of specific crime statistics that happen on and around the campus. Certain crimes in certain sectors are actually required to be reported that happen in the wider community, not just on the campus. That's why I'm saying I feel like a lot of colleges might fall short of this, or might do a very good job of making it so that a lot of students don't know that where they can go get this information. Who said that? Allegedly. I mean, all of that allegedly. Make your own conclusions and opinions. So essentially it's just greater transparency to the community of what happened. So what is her story? Janine Cleary was a freshman in 1986 and was raped and murdered on her own campus, in her own campus residence, so her residence hall. The event led to increased attention on underreported crimes on numerous college campuses across the country. In 1990, Congress enacted the Janine Cleary Act, Disclosure of Campus Security Policies and Crime Statistics Act. The act has been amended 5 times since its enactment to include increasing safety and reporting measures, most recently in 2013, which we're going to talk about here in just one second. Why is it that bad shit has to happen before we make certain establishments accountable? I have major issues with college in this country, and in the interest of a shorter video, since this segment's already at 30 some minutes, we're not going to get into every single detail of that, but, with a big old but, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like college is the best thing ever, and that it's not fucked up that we have to have people die before we can get them to properly disclose information that they should have just been probably giving out anyways. But you know what? Campus Save Act builds upon the Cleary Act, and it's the Campus Sexual Violence Elimination Act, so SAVE. And amends the Cleary Act to encourage greater transparency. It requires colleges to be transparent about crimes of sexual violence on campus. Campus-wide sexual prevention and education programs are required, which I will say my college definitely did. I had to take it. My sister had to take it. College must guarantee rights for victims of sexual violence and provide certain accommodation. What that accommodation is, I don't know. In my experience, I honestly would probably suggest not taking it. And colleges must have protocol for disciplinary proceedings and follow certain standards. Again, who knows? Alrighty. This one's going to be a long one because now we have to talk about incest. We just finished up with rape. We just finished covering rape statistics and different laws around it. Incest. So, what is incest? Incest generally involves sexual activity between certain family members, although sometimes marriage or cohabitation is enough for something to legally be considered incest. Where incest is legal, New Jersey allows you to be incestuous as long as you are 18 or older. Rhode Island does not prohibit incest between people who are 16 or older. However, both states prohibit incestuous marriage. Ohio prohibits incest only if it's a parent-child relationship. Surprisingly, Alabama was not on this list. They actually make it illegal. But New Jersey, Rhode Island, Ohio, what the fuck are you doing? One reason that why incest is very concerning is, we're just going to put that out there, genetic issues is like 100% likely with incest. Just saying. So, I will say in this conversation, incest more refers to the sexual assault of family members by family, like, refers to people being sexually assaulted by their family members, basically. Which is not cool. I don't know, I just feel like the rape thing should have covered that, but whatever. This is what we're doing. So, in this conversation, I'm going to try to, like, highlight that, but I also just want to talk about, in general, since we're talking about it, why this happens and what it looks like, because I can see a world where you could have just said incest and meant incest, and most people would have ran with it. But why we had to make it the rape of individuals by their family members, for me, but... So, a prosecutor seeking conviction for incest will need to prove that the defendants engaged in certain conduct prohibited by the applicable statute. Some states, such as Georgia and Illinois, require sexual intercourse or penetration to be considered incest. Other states, such as Michigan and Washington, prohibit a broader range of sexual conduct. In some states, such as California and Florida, a prosecutor can convict simply by proving marriage, even if no sexual act occurred. In Pennsylvania and a handful of other states, cohabitation is enough without a formal marriage. I think the reason cohabitation is enough is because of what is known as a common law marriage. Because if that was the case, kids could not, families couldn't live together underneath the same roof. So I'm thinking it applies more to common law marriage sort thoughts, not you can't go live with your family. However, I could be wrong. In addition, a prosecutor must show that certain family relationship existed between the parties. So they have to be related, and it depends on which state and how related they have to be. Like in Ohio, where as long as you're not parents and parents and child, everything's fine. Why? And a prosecutor may also need to prove that the defendant knew about the family relationship. This may be obvious in some cases, but other cases less clear. It is rare, and it is still gross, but sometimes it happens where people don't actually know. Believe it or not. When I found that out, I was kind of floored. How could you not know? Sometimes people just don't know. Yeah, so of sexual abuse victims that come to law enforcement's attention, more than a quarter are victimized by family members, while 60% are abused by someone else in their social network. The majority of juvenile victims know the perpetrator, and approximately 34% of perpetrators in cases of child sexual abuse are family members. So that's more what people mean when they say incest. Rape and incest. This, what I just read to you, is more what people mean when they say incest, which to me is kind of wild because that's still rape, but... Oratory, how we love thee. So I do have a very interesting study that I want to highlight because I think it focuses in this again. We're more talking about the rapey incest, not the consensual incest, which I really would have liked to have been able to talk more about the consensual incest because I really was curious as to what would possess a person to do such a thing. Could not find information on that. But I could find information on why a person would rape their family members, so we're going to talk about that. As if this video didn't get gross enough. So the study sample consisted of 43 incest cases, 36 females, 7 males, with an age range of 4 to 40 years. 2/3 of the victims were under 18 years old. All perpetrators were males. Father-daughter incest was for 34.9%. Was found to be the most common incest type, followed by brother-sister incest at 14%. 75% of the perpetrators were family members and relatives with... It's on the screen. While 25% of them were not, but faithful and intimate relatives of the victim. Let's talk about the demographics. So, socio-demographic and clinical data for the perpetrators. This is funny. So the perpetrators, age, illiterate, primary school, high school. Employed, unemployed, yes and no to a medical problem. 31%, or 31 of the total, so 72% age. Primary school, 6% illiterate, 14% illiterate, and this is talking more education level. I don't know why it says age, but you get what I'm getting at. We're not talking like a child who can't read yet doing this, although in some cases that does happen, but that's a very heavy gray area because talk about not knowing what you're doing or not knowing that what you're doing, again, not excusable, but also very just, that is a whole sticky and nuanced mess that I am not getting into, at least in this video. So we're talking more education than actual age. Employed 53.5%, unemployed 46.5%. I'd have honestly expected that to be an inverted with a little bit more of a gap, but whatever. And medical problem, no, most of them don't have a medical problem. So most of them are employed. Majority of them have a lesser education, I think. I really don't. Primary school, 72%, but most of them are employed and most of them don't have a medical problem. So families, number of child per family. Less than 3, 20%, 3 to 5, 67.4%, and then greater than 5, only 11.7%. It makes sense that 3 to 5 range would be, because you need enough kids. This is going to sound fucking horrible. You need enough kids that it's not super noticeable, but also not so many that there's not so many eyes. I'm throwing up after this probably, because what the fuck. Maternal education. Illiterate, 37.2%. Primary school, 67.8%. Sure. Paternal education. Illiterate, 9.3. Primary school, 83.7. High school, 7.0. Most of the mothers were unemployed, meaning they were around. And then most of the fathers were employed, meaning they weren't around. 34% of offenders are fathers, 14% are brothers, anyways, 56% or 25.6, and then also 25.6. A majority was penetrative, and a majority of that was vaginal, but not a huge majority, of course. Most of them did not have physical abuse involved, which I think is really important for people's understanding of how this happens. So yeah, most of the time when kids are being sexually abused, they're not actually being physically abused. Cool. Most of them were for less than a year, and very few were for greater than a year. And victim perpetrator living together, majority, yes. Okay. I think I'm done with that. Incest studies usually consist of case reports or anonymous surveys. In contrast, their data is based on information that was given to them by the victims or victims' family members. On the other hand, study has some limitations. They said that one is that they had low case numbers. They also don't have longitudinal outcomes. All in all, I do think, though, this study does highlight a lot of the really concerning demographics and pieces of this puzzle. And that is, the mothers tend to be around. They tend to live with the perpetrator. They tend to not be physically abused. Which is disgusting. I will say the study did mention that they only had male perpetrators. Female perpetrators are 100% a thing. Not as common, 100% a thing. And honestly, this conclusion mentions how incest is taboo and but also a neglected social problem. You think that's a taboo and a neglected social problem? When a female offender comes out, it is bad. We recently had one, she was a teacher, come out in my area. The reaction. When it happens with male offenders, I think due to just political and social climates, whether they're true or false, I am a male, but so I'm sure there's a little bit of bias there, but even just statistically and real life, touching grass wise, it really shouldn't be expected that it should be I don't know. I think that the same level of shock should be equated to both, because most men are good people and would not do such a thing. And a lot of female perpetrators, victims, are males, and males don't report. Anyways, so basically we had this teacher get caught in the area. The outrage was almost instant, and it happens with any female perpetrator caught, it's disbelief, it's this feeling of betrayal, it's a very heightened awareness, and it is earth-shattering in its communities. So let's talk about why this is an argument to begin with. Like, what is this argument between whether or not we should allow abortions for rape and incest? So, firstly, how often do people get pregnant from this? And, sorry, 1 second, I'm finding notes. Here we go. So, of course, they're quoting... I actually don't know who that is. Anyways, here's the quote. There was a consensus that politically, if you don't include exceptions for rape and incest, politicians won't go for it, voters won't like it, and the Supreme Court won't tolerate it. What you see now is pro-life groups saying there's no longer a political necessary and that we can be opposed to all abortions, and we want the GOP to be with us. Pro-choice groups see rape and incest exceptions as the canary in the coal mine when it comes to extremism. They argue if you're willing to abandon these exceptions, then there's no saying when you're going to stop. What does that mean? What? Canary in the coal mine for what? Gonna stop where? Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't rape and incest exceptions basically say abortion illegal unless it is from rape or incest? Meaning if those gone, what? What? Cool. That doesn't make sense. That bottom part, the canary in the coal mine, when it comes to extremism, they argue if you're willing to abandon these exceptions, there's no saying when you're going to stop. Stop with what? That's like the last part of abortion. Like, that is the end of the argument. Like, stop where? That is it. The train has reached the station. If they have full ban with no exceptions for rape and incest, that means there's a full ban. What? What are you talking about? Oh my god. Like, what could you possibly be talking about? According to the Guttmacher Institute, only 1.5% of women get an abortion for rape or incest. We're going to talk about that statistic in a second. Okay, ready? Abortions due to rape by state in 2025. Again, it says 2025. It was 2023, 2024. So, Texas and California combined had 1,639 cases from 2019 data of pregnancy from rape. Pregnancy from rape. California with 1,480, Texas with 159.2. How you have 0.2 of a pregnancy? I've never understood that, how that works with stats, how like you can have 0.2 of a person, and I've taken a couple stats classes in my time and did quite well in them, and I still was just like, I'll run with the number, and I have it, and it's sitting here in front of me, and I got it. I got it with the calculator. I typed in the buttons, and it came out. But how that works is still beyond me. Because we're talking about a whole ass person. What do you mean you got 0.2 of a person? So there were 10,026.7 plus, so over 10,000.7. Again, how do you have 0.7 of a person? Rape-related abortions in 2019. The problem with these percentages is actually underreporting of abortions and rapes. So we're talking about coat hangers and other just deplorable tactics, as well as just not reporting when it's actually a rape. So the previous article, which we're going to go back to, this one that had that wonderful quote. I don't normally do this because it's not, I don't think it's really that important, but I am going to point out that the source for this article is USA Today and the Guttmacher Institute. Anyways, as compared to the other one, which is the World Population Review. Anyways. we get this beautiful little quote from this article as well. I just want to highlight that real quick. It's really hard to tell where he sits when it comes to this issue, because he has said on record that he thinks it should be a state's issue, but then also says things like this. Sorry. I don't know. It's not really important. It really isn't to this conversation. Whether he is for or against it is so irrelevant to whether or not it should be a crime or a right. So women's abortion decisions, supposedly, again, we're still talking about USA Today here, so take it with a block of salt. Women's abortion decisions rarely stem from rape and incest cases. I will say I do have. I said that, which is a rude thing to say. But I do have some other stuff to talk about that isn't just from them, that does collaborate this to a certain degree. What I have found with this USA Today article, because it gives us good quotes and it gives us good graphics, which is why I'm using it. What I have found is, while its statements aren't necessarily wrong, its numbers are, and they tend to be lower, but the actual numbers, however, are not that high. If that makes sense. You'll see what I mean. You saw what I mean with the other one. So women's abortion decisions rarely stem from rape or incest cases. They stem, according to USA Today, 74% stem from having a baby would dramatically change my life. 73%, which again, you're given a choice, pick one, whatever. Are they allowed to pick multiple? I bet they're allowed to pick multiple. That has to be the only reason why that could be possible. Again, sometimes I don't understand these studies when it comes to, they don't disclose enough of how they do this shit. How about that? 73% say they can't afford a baby right now. 48% don't want to be a single mother or having relationship problems. 38% have completed 38% have completed my child ban. They're done having kids. They don't want any more kids. So 38% don't want no more kids. 1% is from rape. 0.5% is from incest. Again, the general concept that more are for these reasons than that reasons, true. The number is not. The number is not. Which is why I'm highlighting this. That's why I'm talking about this. Because the general concept is accurate and it gives us a good graphic for you to see that. However, I do want to say the number is not accurate. US Today is wrong in their reporting. So, we're going to talk about that. A closer look at rape and incest exceptions in states with abortions and early gestational restrictions. So, Arizona has no exceptions at the 15-week limit. South Dakota, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas have no exceptions in the state ban for rape or incest. Among the 21 states with abortion bans or early gestational limits, 11 make exceptions for pregnancies resulting from rape or incest, and 10 do not. It is estimated that only 21% of sexual assaults are reported. Survivors are often afraid to report sexual violence to the police due to the fear of retaliation. Sorry, dyslexic. Due to the fear of retaliation and the belief that the law enforcement will not do anything to help. Few people have access to abortion care under the rape or incest exceptions to state abortion bans, while data from states with abortion bans and exceptions for rape or incest is scant. Estimates show that very few abortions are provided in states with total abortion bans, even in those with sexual assault exceptions. And so then rape and sexual assault coercion related in pregnancy in the United States. 1 in 20 women in the U.S. or over 5.9 million women experienced a pregnancy from either rape or sexual coercion, or both during their lifetime. And this is from a 2024 study, I will say. With the information provided from the 1996 study, it is reasonable to estimate that 3 million abortions have occurred due to rape and related pregnancies in the United States since 1996. So based on all the information from much more legitimate sources than USA Today, we can determine since 1996, approximately 3 million abortions have occurred in the US. So, where does that put us? Definitely greater than 1.5%. But we're not talking like a huge number greater. We're not talking a huge number greater. We're talking approximately anywhere from 5 to 2.5%. Given the fact, pause, breathe, hold on. I know somebody's about to be in the comments. How dare you? Underreporting of both when it's rape and actual abortions from this, as well as the fact that, I mean, I don't know how better I can put this than what I read to you earlier, but basically it's greater than what USA Today had. Is that like it occurs more often? Like the numbers say it occurs more often. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, that's what we're looking at when it comes to that. So the final thing I want to talk about is this book. This book is a source of controversy, and most of you probably don't even know it exists. But it has some really interesting shit in it. So let's talk about it. First off, obviously, one of the things that, and we're talking about a very specific study in this book, but one of the things that victims tend to do of rape, they tend to blame themselves, addressed right off the bat in this study. Most rapists, surprisingly, have some form of sexual dysfunction, specifically when it comes to ejaculation. Of course, we're talking about male rapists in this, but most male rapists have some form of sexual dysfunction, specifically when it comes to ejaculation. I don't know, something about that fact is just makes sense in the most perverse way possible. And here for the really important information, okay? 50% of women who get pregnant from rape do not get an abortion because they believe that the fetus has value and that the act is immoral or violent. The study holds that women who seek an abortion for rape recover worse so than those who do. Or don't. Sorry. So basically that means that mothers who keep their child conceived in rape recover better than the women who get an abortion. And we're not even saying that they believe, like, that they raise the child. We're saying they just bear and give birth to the child, that the mother recovers from the rape better if they do not get an abortion and they go ahead and carry the child to term, if they get pregnant from the rape. One more time. The mother, based on these findings, recovers better from rape of which she got pregnant from. So if a mother gets pregnant in rape, she recovers better if she carries the child to term. Doesn't look into whether or not she keeps and raises the child or if she puts the child up for adoption. It's just saying if it's a case of rape, the mother actually recovers better if she carries the child to term. And that is because, partly, because a majority of mothers have a belief in the value of the unborn life, even though they are a victim of rape. Some talked about not wanting to perpetuate a cycle of violence because they viewed the act of abortion as violent. Even if they didn't believe that that it was a human fetus, they still viewed the act of abortion as violent and did not want to perpetuate violence upon their body, and just in the world. And so all in all, this finds that. Now, I was having a conversation about this study and about the project I'm working on, and I was like, that's a very odd like, what is it about it that makes mothers recover better? And one piece of information that I think can kind of shine a light on that has to do with the cross-placental DNA sharing of the fetus to the mother and how the fetal cells, the plural cells, are able to reassign themselves to any part of the body, filling the mom with new life and new energy from that child. And I don't mean that like metaphorically, I mean that mitochondrially. So, yeah. I think it makes sense, even at a biological reason, why the mother carrying the baby to term would help her body recover better, because rape does leave a physical imprint on the body. I mean, generally there's trauma to certain areas, and so those fetal cells will be able to rebuild, repair, and rejuvenate parts of the bodies. Obviously, not completely. That would be insane. That's not how that works. But it would still aid in the mother's physical recovery, which will aid in the mother's mental recovery. I think that's my theory as to partly why. And I do think the women, even though those who didn't believe that the fetus was a baby or independent human life, I do think the women both. So there was two groups. There was some that believed it was an independent human life and those that didn't. But both of those groups were saying that it was a perpetual cycle of violence. I think that that is accurate. And you're going to see why in the next segment, which is, what is an abortion? What happens when you go in to get an abortion? And you're going to see why people hold the belief that it is a perpetual of the cycle of violence when it comes to rape. And to give my closing thoughts on this segment, and like, should there be a provision for rape and incest? If you're going to ban abortion, ban abortion. If you're not, not. I do not think that it is actually a special case, because adoption is an offer, and there's a lot of discourse around it. But fun fact, there are more families wanting to adopt than available children in the system. That is a statistically proven fact. I'm not even going to bother to put up screenshots because Google will tell you that. More parents want to adopt than there are children available. So I think it really doesn't matter. And if you're going to ban abortion, ban it. And if you're not, not. That's my thought of the special cases. Because coming from a strictly data-driven point of view, it isn't that frequent. And the data says it's better to keep the baby anyways. So if you're going to ban it, ban it. If you're not, not. I don't see any reason to play this game. Actually, I think pro-lifers might say the exact same thing about the canary in the coal mine than pro-choicers will, and it would make a little bit more sense, because I'm still quite confused as to what they meant. Peace out, loves. I know the ending there got a little bit gritty. I mean, this whole segment was pretty rough. But I encourage you to keep an eye out for the next segment, or just wait out and go watch the final part. And if this is the first piece that you're stumbling on, I encourage you to go watch everything else that I've talked about up to this point. And if you are somebody who is mad at my take at the end there, I'm more than happy to hear it. I'm more than happy to hear why you disagree. The one thing I will ask is that we refrain from insults, and that we actually interact with what I said. And we go and watch other stuff that I've put out on this issue, and we don't just run with the singular video. But beyond that, have a great rest of your day, loves. I will see you all in the next one, and I hope to see you in the final project, the final video. But yeah, have a great rest of your day. I will see y'all later.